Hi, my name is Renford Reese. I'm a professor in the political science department and director of the Colorful Flags program at Cal Poly Pomona. We're here today as a part of the Prison Race series to have a candid discussion with Mr. Clarence Rudy Brown, a person who has spent 15 years in the federal prison system. I want to talk to him about his youth. I want to talk to him about the offense that led to him being incarcerated. I want to talk to him about the culture in the federal prison system. And finally, I want to fast forward and talk to him about adjusting to life in the free world. He's just been paroled 8 months ago, and he's facing the challenges that all parolees face. Rudy, glad to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, tell me about what it was like growing up in Pomona in the 1970s.
It was a great time. I'm a child of a product of Pomona. My father preached here, my mom, and they had a church here in Pomona. Went to the elementary schools, junior highs, high schools, and I had a great life, two-parent family.
So your mom and your father were preachers?
Yes, my mother is an evangelist, still in the teaching mode at 80 right now.
So what type of person were you? What type of kid, what type of student were you growing up?
I was probably an excellent student in elementary and junior high school. High school, it wasn't too great, and not because I didn't have the sense, but I just didn't go to school like I should have. But I was an athlete.
You were an athlete, but your father was a preacher.
Yes, sir.
Your mother was in the church also.
Yes.
And so I would imagine that they were strict disciplinarians.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
How did you get around not going to school?
Just barely making it, going when I needed to. I graduated high school, but I just didn't apply myself as I did getting my higher education.
Right. So what were you doing if you were not going to school? What were you doing?
Just ditching, basically. I was working as a senior, playing sports and working, and I had a child out as a senior in high school.
Right.
So I didn't apply myself as I should have.
So then how did fatherhood, you had a child when you were 17 years old?
17.
How did fatherhood, did it change you at all, or were you doing the same types of things?
Well, it changed me, and I went to the military to get stability. You know, I was already disciplined. I knew what discipline was. You know, my parents were there to do that, but I needed my own job, my own stability, my own manhood, you might say, and be able to take care of my child. So I went to the military.
Okay. You said you were an athlete. What sports did you play?
Well, I played all basketball, football, baseball. Basketball is my favorite, though.
Oh, okay.
You know, I played
so
overseas.
You had aspirations of going to play in college?
I did, and I was always told I was too short. And so when I went to the military, I played in Germany for 3 years. I was exempt from duty, and I just traveled around and on the division team, and I played.
Okay, so how long did you serve in the military?
Just 4 years.
4 years.
Well, actually 8 years total.
Okay, what was that experience like?
It was great. I enjoyed it. I was able to meet friends that I still have today. Right. And we stay in touch.
Right. So you seem like a very balanced, a very disciplined person, especially in the later part of your youth, especially if you have spent 8 years in the military. So it's kind of odd to hear someone who has lived and experienced the military service to have gone to prison for 15 years. So can you just backtrack and just give us some type of chronology of what happened when you came out of the military?
Well, I'm not the typical so-called drug dealer as the courts called me. But what I did, I began to help connect the dots with people, introduce them to people who were in the drug culture. And so because they didn't, the drug dealer per se did not want to meet other people, but they knew me, so I was the middleman. So that's how it began, just helping people.
But when did it happen? I mean, and give me a timeline.
About 88. About 1988 is when I began to get involved.
Okay, when did you come out of the military?
86.
86. So 2 years after the military, you started to get involved in.
Yes, I was working every day for a cable TV company. I was working, and then I met a man who began to work, and I trained him to work with us at the cable TV company. And then he started telling me, hey, I have some people, you know, I have friends that might want to get involved. Do you have a connect? Do you know anybody? And at that point, I was, you know, we were making only $6.50 an hour. And I felt like, well, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to get my hands dirty really. So I felt like, oh well, it was okay, and that's how I began to connect people together.
Right.
And I never had any other, no criminal history. I think I've had maybe 2 tickets in my life.
Right. So in 1988, that's when you start to get introduced to the culture.
That's it.
And then how long was it before you had the drug offense? From 1988
to 1994.
So you were involved from 1988 to 1994 before you were charged with the drug offense?
Yes.
Okay. So
off and on for those 6 years.
So if you could be candid with us, can you tell us what type of money were you making at the time?
In the beginning, it was just a few $100s at a time, just selling. Actually, we were sending small amounts of cocaine from California to Georgia, and it was nothing. Just make a few $100s extra. Then it began to multiply, and eventually we would make. I've made 85,000 in 5 minutes profit at one time.
In 5 minutes?
I mean, I've made that's the type of money that came through in later years. There's times where 200,000-300,000, was nothing. I've lost 400,000 in the airport at one time.
What do you mean you lost 400,000?
DEA took it.
But they didn't arrest you?
Well, it wasn't on me. It was someone else traveling. But the point is that was the type of money that we were I was moving across country.
So what were you doing with all this money? I mean, you making that's a
lot
of money.
You had to turn. You have to pay the man. You might say you have to pay the suppliers, because I got into a position where I was actually given everything. I was what they call fronted everything. At the time, drugs were going anywhere from 18,000 to over the years to 10,000 a kilo of cocaine. So I wasn't typical. I didn't sell drugs on the street. Right. I kind of fell into a connect who had kilos. I didn't sell on the street corners and out of houses. I didn't do that. I basically was sending it out of state, in bulk. And what happened,
How did you mailed it?
We mailed it, we flew it, any way you can think about getting it out of.
But I mean, did you disguise it, or did you just?
Oh yeah, it was always disguised.
And what were some of the ways you camouflaged it?
I mean, different wrappings, using regular products from a store. Any type of way you would like to send it. Any way you can imagine to send it, we get it there.
And it was primarily cocaine? Was that
the
only? Just cocaine?
Well, at times we would send, I remember that one time we sent 50 pounds of weed, of marijuana, on the airplane, in a suitcase.
It was easy.
Oh yeah, back then, before, it became tough later because a lot of people started using it and the method and getting caught. So therefore DEA was really heavy and hard at the airports. They had dogs. And then if you knew people who worked at the airport, you would know when to come and when not to come. Right. So those were the other advantages if you knew people.
What about crack? This disparity. It was just reform, but the disparity of a person being caught with 5 grams of crack, first-time offense, they got 5 years in prison.
Yes.
And you needed 100 times that amount to get of powder cocaine to get the same sentence for a first-time offense.
Yes, I actually benefited from the law in 2007 because that law was changed. Right. And I actually got 44 months off my sentence. And it wasn't just me, it was everyone in the system who qualified.
The federal system?
The federal system who qualified, who had 4.5, who were sentenced to 4.5 kilograms or less of crack and had no career offense. They were able to get a 2-point reduction in their sentencing scale. So I was a level 38. In turn, I was given a level 36, which went from 235 to 292 months in my sentencing down to 204, 208. So I ended up, instead of 21 years as a first-time nonviolent offense, I was resentenced to 17 years, 4 months.
Okay, tell me now. Let's fast forward. Let's come up to your offense. Can you just walk us through what was the process of you being arrested and convicted?
Well, I was arrested in Pomona at my house, and there was an investigation in Georgia for 2 years, and I was not a part of that investigation. However, when they did arrest those people in Georgia, they found a Federal Express packing slip in one of the gentleman's car. 2 days later, they came to California, hit my house. They didn't find anything. I was aware of what had went down, but they didn't find anything. But 5 months later, they came with an indictment. And what I found out after getting this discovery was that they had a lot of historical information from 1988 until 1994 about me, but they could never put me in the same state or the same city or with anyone. So they just had information, and even the FBI, DEA in California, they didn't know anything about me because I didn't basically sell drugs in the street or even in California. Rarely. It was always sent out of state to another state because of the price was different. But then they arrested me October 1994, and basically it was a conspiracy. And this is what many people don't understand about conspiracies. You don't have to have been caught with anything, which I was never caught with drugs, with money, with guns, nothing. And I was sentenced to 21 years as a first-time nonviolent offender.
But what does conspiracy entail? What
Conspiracy entails two or more individuals speaking about, planning, and what they call the furtherance of the act. When you act upon something, if you and I say we want to go to McDonald's, we have to get in the car and go. We have a conspiracy to eat a hamburger because the furtherance of the act was to go to get the money and go get that product.
So tell me about how you felt when you were arrested. Did you feel that it was coming? When you were out and you were, pushing drugs,
I always knew it.
You always knew it was coming at some point in time.
I always knew it. I knew it because of how I was moving, how I was operating. I never operated typically of the normal drug dealer you might see on television and on the street corner. I operated in airplanes, different methods of postal service, UPS, anything you can imagine. I operated that way.
Did you ever take cocaine on the airplane with you?
Oh yes. There was a time I got drunk. I took almost a kilo of crack cocaine.
On the airplane?
On the spur of the moment. Paid cash for the ticket and went out of state.
And there was no one to
No one
stop?
checked? No,
Nobody
I was fortunate to make it.
Right.
But I probably would have got less time
Right.
if I would have got caught with it than I did with the conspiracy.
Right.
Because possession is less. You get less time for possession than you do for conspiracy.
How much time would you have gotten if you got caught with a possession of a kilo of cocaine?
Probably anywhere from 5 to 10, depending on if it was cocaine or crack, if it was powder or crack, which is no different. Which they've finally come to the realization that there is no difference.
Right.
But
So tell me about the process. Tell me about your lawyer. I asked earlier in a discussion with you, did they offer you a plea?
No, they didn't offer a plea. I never spoke to them. When I got arrested, I never spoke to any DEA, FBI, anyone, because my lawyer was the buffer. And when he told me, his word to me was this: I am a criminal trial specialist. I do not cooperate with the government. I go to trial. And my arrogance, I like that. At the time, I really enjoyed. I was, I'm gonna fight this on the, you fight in the court, I'll fight in the street. Basically, was my attitude. So, I love that about him. And from that point on, we went to trial. There was no need to come to me to talk because I was going to trial regardless.
Right.
And
so tell me about the trial and being convicted, being sentenced.
well, the trial to me was racist because I was in a small town in Augusta, Georgia. I was not amongst any of my peers. They dismissed the blacks off the jury. The jury was sequestered, and that is not typical of a drug trial. That's only typical in capital murder trials. So they were sequestered in a hotel, could not go home. The judge said this trial will be over in 5 days, and we went to trial from 8 in the morning to sometimes 9 at night, every day, and I was convicted that Friday. It was pushed, it was rushed. We had excellent lawyers. There was 3 of us who actually went to trial. But there was so much, I think it's just the naivety of the juries, because there was no evidence against me because I never lived in the city. They had no drugs, no anything to connect me. But the testimony against me was just simply that they knew me, they knew of me, and that the dead guy, who was one of my old friends who died, that he was my connect. He was my person of my man in the city, they might call him, but he was dead. So they used his name quite often in the trial, but there was no one to really say that yes, I actually purchased the drugs directly from me.
Right.
You know.
So how much time did they give you initially?
252 months, which is 21 years, as a first-time nonviolent offender. Never been to jail, never had any criminal history, nothing.
So how did you feel when you heard the judge say?
It didn't sit in. It didn't hit me at the time. I didn't even think about it. All I thought about was, look, told my lawyer, just make sure we appeal this. My wife, my mother and father was in the audience, and it didn't really hit me until later.
Okay, when did it hit you?
When I learned my father broke down, I think that's when it really hit me. It all came crashing down on me that my father had took it really hard. And he's a strong man, and being a pastor for 45 years, I believe, preacher for 60 years prior to his death, he always demonstrated strength. And when I learned he had really broke down, it devastated him that he lost his son to the system. And I think that it just really came crashing down on me emotionally, and I began to, literally cry that I hurt my family.
Right.
And that's what really hit me at first. I didn't take responsibility yet for my crime, but at that point.
Okay, that's what I want to get at. That's what I want to get at. I'm from Georgia, McDonough, Georgia, about an hour and a half from Augusta, and you say the jury, the jurors were racially biased.
Oh yeah.
And then you said that there were procedural flaws.
Oh yeah, the voir dire, everything was inaccurate.
Yeah, but if you look at the big picture, Rudy, you've already admitted guilt that you were involved in the drug trade.
Well,
the drug
not
sales.
at the time, but now, yes, now. I went to trial, there's nothing to hide now. It was all brought out.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, so you're talking about procedural flaws, the evidence that they did not have. But in actuality, you were guilty.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Oh, yeah, that's why I always knew I would go to prison.
Okay, so that's what I'm trying to get at. And you say you didn't take responsibility, but when you broke down, you started to take responsibility for what you were involved in.
Well, not even then. I didn't take responsibility until one night about 3 in the morning, several months later, when two youngsters, we were in the county jail pending my transfer to the federal system, and two young kids were in jail for just petty drug crimes, and they learned who I was. They were like, oh, you're the California Connect. You're the guy they used to call the Ghost. And they had nicknames for me. So, and I'm like, yeah, whatever. So they started telling me all their exploits of how they sold drugs and how they treated people. And what got to me is how they treated women. And then they told me some stories of what they were doing to the women and how they were making them do things sexually and all type of stuff for drugs. And about 3 in the morning, it's like something just overwhelmed me, and I cried like a baby. And at that point, my life changed. That's when I was truly sorry for what I did, because I didn't understand the concept of moving drugs from one city to another state.
And the impact that
and
that
the
drug,
impact
the devastating impact that the drug is having on communities.
I did not understand that until later. And as I began to get more educated, I started to understand that I was just as bad as a murderer or anyone else in the system, because the effects of drugs devastated, like Augusta, Georgia, for instance. It devastated practically, I would say 70% of the city at one time.
Right.
Violence. People lost their jobs, homes. And you would go down there, so many projects, just people everywhere, unemployed, single family homes, addicts. It was devastating, but you don't realize it.
Right.
You don't realize it because you're not on the street, and I never was in the street.
Right.
But when I began to understand it is when I took responsibility for it, and then that's when I changed my life. That's when I began to study, to get educated, to start preaching and teaching that drugs were wrong, and they still are wrong, because it's bad.
Right.
People don't understand that.
So do you think the 15 years, do you think that was disproportionate, or do you think you deserve to spend 15 years in prison?
I don't think I ever deserved 15 years. It didn't take that long for me to learn. And it was disproportionate compared to the people who bring the drugs in the country. You have people here, I knew pilots who would fly tons of drugs.
Commercial pilots?
Commercial pilots
For
were bringing drugs into the country from Mexico, from Colombia, from other countries, from Jamaica. I know people who were sentenced to 5 years. And their paperwork literally reads that they imported and flew as a pilot 5, 6, 7 tons of cocaine.
Wow.
And they got 5 years.
So what was it like? Can you just take us inside the federal prison? In this show, we've talked to a lot of people who've gone to state prison. But can you tell us what it was like to be in a federal prison system?
The feds operate slightly different than the state system. It's not as crowded, obviously, but it is crowded comparatively. But the ratio of staff to inmates a little more, and it's more educated people in the feds, because you have so much more white-collar criminals in there. And the internet has taken that to another level, people getting charged for internet crimes. But the penitentiary, there must be the respect level, just like in the state. There has to be, because there can be the potential for any violence in any level, actually. But from the pen, you have predominantly, in my opinion, black and Hispanic in the feds, just like the state.
Well, but disproportionately, you have
about
executives
60,
and CEOs that are involved in white-collar crime. Aren't they white?
Yes, majority. So
why do you have the majority of blacks or the majority of the people in the federal prison who are black and Hispanic?
Well, that's what I tell you. It's a racist system.
Even the federal system?
Even the federal system, because, and that's why I told you the juries are so naive, because the preponderance of evidence, or the, when you go to trial, which most people are afraid to, they're afraid of the feds. They're afraid of the government, that they will not face a jury. And they're just so afraid because they're so used to hearing that, oh, you're going to get 30 years, you're going to get 30 years. So they just go and say, all right, I'll plead guilty to whatever. And they'll do the time. And the majority of the time, there's no evidence against them. Right. And this is sad in the system.
So do you have, in the federal prison, do you have to always watch your back? You have to be paranoid the same way you do in the state
I don't
system?
believe so. I don't think it's that way. Certain situations, yeah, there are times when there's gang violence. There's a lot of stuff going on in the feds, just like the states. However, it's not as bad, but in the last 10 years, the system is changing because of the immigration factors. It's changing because the system has taken anybody off the street, the uneducated, the smallest guy on the street with one $20 piece of rock cocaine, and putting him in prison for 10 years in the feds, when all they had to do was put him in a rehab center or a halfway house and get him retrained, give him some education, get him a GED. Instead of doing that, they sent him to prison for 10 years because of the war machine on war on drugs.
Right.
The failed war on drugs.
Okay, you said the failed war on drugs.
Failed war on drugs.
Okay, so I want to fast forward to now. I want you to tell me about what you're doing now and some of the challenges of really trying to make adjustments in the free world after spending 15 years in prison.
I came out angry, bitter, because the system is a failure. The system is racist. And you can go all the way back to the history of cocaine in this country, why it was outlawed. Because it was actually legal, just like heroin. It was actually legal. They sold it, and Sears and Roebuck sold it. But the policies in the system made me really angry. And I studied law in the system. I got 3 college degrees while I was in, had 2 associate's degrees and a bachelor's in psychology. And I came home angry and bitter at the system. However, I was prepared to come home. I prepared my mind from day one. When they let me on that yard, I said, they're not going to kill me. They're not going to take my life from me. So I came home, and day one, I was able to leave the halfway house to go look for a job or get licensed. I started doing everything in my power to circumvent every rule, to keep an extra hour out to get on a computer to learn how to operate the internet, navigate, look for a job. And because I had a support system, my family, which was a blessing, it made it a little easier, the transition to actually look for a job and to make contact with people and employers and work on my child support issues and get my driver's license. And all these things that you need to do when you get home just to be legal in the city, you know, to walk around with a driver with an ID. I had to do all these things in a short period of time. And
so you eventually got a job?
And fortunately, I was hired as a job developer for a parolee project. And ironically, at a college. And that was the most amazing thing, and it's been a great experience ever since. It's been a great experience that and I'm involved with the largest correctional educational library in the world at Cal State San Bernardino.
Right, okay. So tell me, what are your plans? What are your 3-year goals?
My 3-year goals is get my master's degree. And that's what I'm trying to embark upon now, find a school that I can get into. And we've developed a nonprofit to actually teach youngsters about the system. And there's a lot of funding right now coming through WIA, the Workforce Investment Act, for reintegration, for actually DRCs and things of this nature, day reporting centers. Instead of sending people to prison, there's a change of atmosphere now. They're involving churches and community organizations now to put people in some life skills trainings to prevent them from going to prison. And this is necessary today because the prison system's overcrowded, and we're trying to get involved.
Okay. Rudy, I want to thank you for coming in. You have an inspirational story. Your mind is very sharp, very analytical, very articulate, and I want to commend you for making that transition and that transformation in your life. And I think you can be a shining light for a lot of people out there, not just parolees, but other people. And I want to thank you again for coming in today.
Well, thank you for having me.